Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It is Monday, the 13th of May. I had a double check there. Yeah, another day, another morning briefing. Joe, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm not bad. Good. You?
Yeah, spot on. Before we get stuck into things, it's never a dull weekend, really, is it? Covering Sunderland. We're in partnership with the Farm Museum, as you know, and Cospex Opticians. We still have our bumper sort of competition going on over on our website. It's just £1 to subscribe for 6 months with the top quality content, and you'll also be in line to win Black Cats Bar season tickets. A pair of those, they're worth over £1,600. So great prize heading into next season. As you may have seen, if you're following us on Twitter and Facebook this morning, we've got another sort of smaller competition launched this morning. All you have to do is follow us, share the post that you've seen, and tag a mate, and you could win a 1992 retro Sunderland shirt from the Cup final. Joe, again, as I said there, not a quiet weekend. Another name linked with the Sunderland head coach position, Bo Svensson. I'll be honest, know very little about him, but it seems to be, as we've said it a number of times, the way that Sunderland seem to be sort of going this summer, doesn't it? Or at least the names linked are very different to the ones that we've seen with the previous sort of vacant roles in the past couple of seasons.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. I mean, the same could be said about a lot of the names, to be honest with you. We go back to December. I know Will Stills obviously created a bit of a brand for himself, if that's the correct term to use.
Yeah.
But you would actually, I think it would be fair to say that he wouldn't be widely known from the Sunderland fan base point of view. Likewise, Ramage, and I suppose you could look at people like Danny Roll as well before he came into Sheffield Wednesday. So it does feel as though that is the kind of trend in the way that Sunderland are going. They want like a head coach, a young upcoming, maybe it's a foreign head coach that they can tap into their sort of philosophy rather than a manager figure or father figure or both that we got from Tony Mowbray. I think in a recent podcast I said I looked at names that have worked or felt as though have worked for Sunderland in recent years. You likes of Mowbray, Keane, Allardyce, go back to Peter Reid, those sort of figures. Mick McCarthy, another one. It certainly feels as though there's a shift from that kind of manager, if you will, and very much in the head coach mode. We saw that with Michael Beale coming in. He ticks a lot of those boxes as well. Obviously, it didn't work out, but yeah, it certainly seems that's the way that they're going to go. And another name linked, I think, I'm not sure about you, but to get another name linked at this stage, are you surprised by that?
Yeah, it was, to be fair. Obviously, Alan Nixon's the journalist that brought the news over that, and he was hinting at it a couple of weeks ago. It is interesting, as you say, that it seems so late on. Heading into at least the final few games of the season, we were under the impression that Sunderland they're not willing to hang about. Okay, I mean, 3 weeks at the end of the season, it's not the longest sort of time. Look, I think it would be silly if the club aren't going to have a new head coach in the dugout before pre-season starts. I think it's a pretty realistic aim for that to happen. As of Friday, there was nothing really imminent, but talks were progressing well with, prospective candidates. Make of that, again, what you will. The decision has to come soon, doesn't it, as well? I mean, before we obviously get stuck into Bo Svensson, a little bit of background on him. As we've said, look, Mike Dodds' tenure was 13 games in the end, something like that he had in charge. That's ample time as well and I get the club want to, they want to get the right man. We've seen from, the Michael Beale appointment over December, it didn't work out. I've got no issue with them taking their time and making the appointment. It just sort of coincided with how, disappointing and awful the end of last season was, which, hasn't helped things really, has it?
No, I think if the end of the season had been much more positive, then that time frame would have been either a bit more luxury with it, or it certainly feels that way. I think the circumstances around appointing Mike Dodds in the interim, and then because of it, like you say, 2 wins in 13, 16th in the championship finish, it feels as though there's more pressure on it. People wanting news and wanting it now almost. You can understand a little bit more time just with seasons having to finish, particularly if, like what we said there, that if that's the route they're going to go down and there's managers, head coaches still in jobs at the moment or still with seasons to play out, that obviously has to be factored in as well. But yeah, I think if the season had ended on a more positive note, people it wouldn't feel as though, yes, it's still important, but there would have still been a little bit of leeway with it, I feel. Whereas now it feels as though you need it just to try and completely draw a line under last season and look ahead to next season. I mean, obviously, like you said there, pre-season, you would fully expect the head coach to be in long before pre-season, to be honest. I mean, we're a week on now, over a week on from the end of the season, and people are feeling as though that's too long. So yeah, it does feel as though a decision needs to come within the next, certainly by the end of this month for me. I know players go away and that's the end of the season, and people switch off until sort of their pre-season, I think, as the players get it when their programs come back. But and how much work could be done between now and then with the new head coach coming in? Very little, probably. Maybe a few phone calls, or Zoom meetings or whatever, because you wouldn't think that the team will be meeting now. But just to have somebody in place, just to have that line of sort of organisation and knowing where you're going, it'll certainly help supporters and knowing what's coming over the next season. And then if it is going to be, like, say, a head coach, people might not know plenty about, chance to go and research and hear about them, and there'll be interviews and things like that. But yeah, it does feel as though something needs to happen sooner rather than later. You don't want it to drag on and on.
Yeah, it certainly ties into something that I was going to bring up anyway, about something that Dom Howson mentioned on a podcast that we did with him, obviously heading into that Sheffield Wednesday game. Sheffield Wednesday went up through the playoffs as Sunderland did the year prior to the one we've just had. And, it's that time frame, isn't it? When you come up through the playoffs, you do have less time to prepare, but the same can be said, can't it, for now, if you leave them it's just the luxury of having that sort of extra 2 weeks for them to even come in, familiarise themselves with their surroundings, settle into the area, bring in the new, coach and staff, if they are to bring them in, which is an interesting talking point again, which we can sort of touch on in a little bit. But it's just all those sort of luxuries again, settling in without having the immediate pressure of, winning games straight away if you were to appoint someone during the season, for example. But it certainly makes for, as the names that we're seeing linked with, it certainly makes for sort of interesting reading. It's a bit of a strange position sort of to be in at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think you hit the nail on the head there, to be honest. It's the sooner you get someone in, if it is going to be someone from a different country, it allows the human being aspect of it to happen. Like you say, without the pressure of needing 3 points every week. That was something that Mike Dodds had touched on in his final press conference. I think, that he found, without having his own sort of pre-season time, your focus is just purely on the next opposition, the next week, the next game, and trying to get 3 points. He felt as though it was really, really, I think the quote was, I found it really, really challenging to build any momentum, because your focus is purely on the game. You can't embed your own imprint on things. So, and how many times do we hear players and managers talk about the pre-season? So to get all the outside stuff, the stuff that fans and people don't really consider, which, because it's all about what happens on the pitch, but to get all that done early and out the way, so you can just purely focus on the pre-season and getting what you need to do, of course that would help. Yeah, no doubt about it.
I mean, we'll touch on Bo Svensson a little bit and sort of some comparisons to some of the names mentioned. Obviously, he's had a playing career, centre half, Danish international, started his career at KB, came through Copenhagen, Borussia Mönchengladbach, and played for Mainz. He then had a sort of coaching career with FC Liefering, which is interesting because they're seen as the feeder club to Red Bull Salzburg, which is interesting because that's the same club that Ramage came through or started his sort of coaching career. I did a bit over the weekend just on Ramage and what we might see if he were to be appointed at Sunderland, sort of his background. And then obviously most recently, Svensson was at Mainz. Now, again, as you say there, it's not an appointment that it's came out of the blue, really, hasn't it? Or the name linked it, whether it's further on or not. It's, as I said in one of the previous podcasts, Sunderland have done quite well to keep their appointment close to the chest. I think even Michael Beale came pretty out of the blue. They've been talking with candidates for since Beale left and making sure they get the right appointment. But it does seem a bit of a strange one. I'm a bit on the fence as to whether it be a good coup or not. He obviously had Mainz he's had them on the fringes of the Europa Conference League spots in the Bundesliga. You can argue that's a better league. But as we've said, before getting stuck into this without doing too much background research on it, it's an appointment that, it would be interesting to see what would happen.
Yeah, I mean, it feels more left field than some of the other ones almost. But then on the flip side, like they're going out and doing their homework and doing their research. So it's difficult to know without. I mean, I'm not going to confess to watching Mainz in the Bundesliga very often, so it's hard to gauge what sort of brand he'd bring to Sunderland. I think you can look at perhaps sort of like Xavi Alonso over there, how well he's done compared to last season, and the gap that they've made up from that. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I just thought it was very odd that a new name would come out, like we said, going back over all the ground there, to come out at this stage in proceedings. You would think that talks progressing and how the head coach candidacy is moving on, you would think that they would be very much down to the final candidates, and this is one that's come. I know there was sort of very tentative links around when Alex Neil left, going back to sort of August 22, but yeah, it does seem as, I mean, if he's on the radar, or if he has been on the radar, then we'll never be privy to that. But it does seem strange for one to come out at this stage for me. It's hard. I'm struggling trying to put it into words, to be honest, because again, you look at the different types of style and brands that managers bring, and all of these ones seem as though they're different.
Yeah.
As though there's like a theme with all of the. I know, other than them just being sort of this European coach and fitting into that kind of sport and director mold, they all kind of feel as though they're different. There's not a theme with them all. I don't know if you'd agree with that. But...
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that's what will tie into the conversation this summer about what direction the club want to go in, and whether, because go back to the 5-year plan and when they all came in, style of play has been something that's been spoken about quite regularly. Again, you have to go back to Christian Speakman when Michael Beale was appointed, full of praise for Tony Mowbray's work, said that the style of play in football shouldn't change that much. Now, with hindsight, we're sat there thinking, well, why did it change at all? Because we've seen since, Tony Mowbray left that the style of play, etc., has fallen off a cliff. But as you say there, that, each manager will have, or each head coach will have their own sort of stamp and how they want to play. But you make a really good point there about them all being different kinds of managers. What's interesting as well is that they're all at sort of different stages of their managerial career. So René Maric hasn't had a head coach role before, will still really early on in his sort of head coach journey. Bo Svensson managed at Liefering and Mainz. Heckenbottom, another name linked, he's obviously had promotions on his CV with Barnsley and Sheffield United. Slightly more experienced. Liam Rossignol, there's nothing necessarily to link him with the club yet, just suggestions, from ourselves that, it might be a half decent fit, championship level, now available for nothing. It's, again, it sort of brings us back to that conversation of this is all about showing this appointment what direction the club want to go in.
I mean, with the Svensson one as well, you look at the age. I mean, I think Maric and Still are both, I think they're both 31, Daniel 35. Svensson is 44. So again, there's a bit of a disparity there in terms of what you want to go. We spoke about it in the review, and we spoke about it on a separate podcast again as well, about Sunderland being married to this philosophy of wanting to be the youngest team, youngest owner. Are they going to bring a youngest head coach in and try and align it all together? Svensson will be a little bit different to that, and likewise a Heckenbottom. So even just that aspect, just going down to simple numbers like that, he feels like a little bit of an outlier. But again, it's really interesting one. It's a good one. It's one that's certainly worth monitoring this week and how that one's going to develop, because it has come out of nowhere a little bit, or it feels as though it has.
Yeah, we've had a comment through from DJ Dave. So morning, Dave. Obviously, Ahmad not getting into Man United side has been sort of a topic of conversation all season. Interestingly, obviously, it's a year to the day since he scored that one top bins against Luton to give Sunderland a slender lead heading down to Kenilworth Road. It's interesting, isn't it? Because he's just starting to sort of come into the fold a little bit at Man United. I don't know if that's just indicative of how poor they've been or how high they've fallen from their perch. But it would have been great to see him back in January. I know it's a move that didn't come about. There were suggestions that he was up for sale for a tiny fee of 8 million. I think you can take that with a pinch of salt, given the amount of money that Manchester United actually spent on him. He's now getting in the side, but Sunderland have missed a player of his quality, haven't they, this year?
Yeah, it'd be some depreciation, that wouldn't it? About 30 million, I think, all in. No, I mean, the Ahmad story is what it is. It was a superb loan. Sunderland have been on the end of both ends of the spectrum in the last two seasons with loan deals. You look at Ahmad and how successful that was. You compare that with sort of Burstow this season. He was just touch of magic. He had that bit of gold dust about him, didn't he? You mentioned that goal against Luton a year ago. he was just an incredible player, really. That fit exactly into what Sunderland were about. And what's interesting is what Sunderland, or certainly like what Mike Dodd said recently.
Yeah,
that's the kind of Sunderland that Sunderland need to be. So
yeah,
we talked about head coaches and things like that, having that flair player who can bring everything together at the top end of the pitch. I mean, the link-up play between Ahmad and Roberts at times was breathtaking. So bringing that X factor in, that's something that head coach need. I'm not saying Ahmad because, his ceiling is probably way above Sunderland's at the moment, even if he is not getting a game at Manchester United. There'll be teams above Sunderland, particularly after this season, that will be probably more benefit for Ahmad and Manchester United going forward. But yeah, what a player, great times. And I mean, it would be great to see him back, but really, really hard to imagine it. I know January, the club really pursued it, almost to the detriment of getting somebody else in, feeling that there might have been an avenue to bring him back on loan, but didn't work out. And it feels as though that one probably is very much gone now.
Yeah, I think that was something Christian Speakman said, wasn't it? They tried so hard to get him back in January, and it probably was to the detriment of bringing in players elsewhere. I think you did a good piece just on Mike Dodds' comments on the loan market as well. I'm keen to just sort of move the topic of conversation onto that because, the summer signings, etc. The loan market's always an interesting one, isn't it? Because we did a bit as well, or you did a bit, sorry, on Fabio Carvalho, and, he performed quite well for Hull, scored important goals. It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Obviously, because the model itself at Sunderland, you want to develop your own players. And it became a topic of conversation towards the end when Mason Burstow wasn't getting a lot of game time. Why are we then trying to improve somebody else's player? But the comments from Dodds were interesting that, they're still going to pursue that avenue. And, from my perspective, it's still something that they should do. It's just about, like you say, like you mentioned just there, getting somebody of the ilk of Ahmad and players like that are available. And as we've seen this season, it's easier said than done.
Of course, it's easier said than done. But I mean, Sunderland have had some excellent loans over the years, some excellent loans, going right the way back through sort of the last 10, 15, 20 years even. They've had some really good loan deals. Of course, they're not all going to work out. The Burstow one, again, it would have ticked a lot of boxes, and they fought off competition. They fought off Champions League competition to bring Burstow in, which tells you where Sunderland are held sort of within the parameters of football in terms of bigger clubs trusting their young players to come to Sunderland. And that's a good place to be. And I said it in the review that I don't think even this season will have changed that in the way the Burstow's move's gone. I don't think that'll have changed things. I still feel as though this summer, for example, a team from the likes of a top 6 Premier League side wouldn't be averse to sending a young player to Sunderland. I really don't think that would be an issue. And I don't think that it's something that Sunderland should close themselves off to. It's absolutely a market that a team like Sunderland or any promotion team, you look at the team that Burnley had when they went up, some of the loan deals that they had in, it can absolutely help you. The only problem is, as is always the case, and as we've just mentioned in Ahmad there, if they are as successful, it's then replacing them. You're almost having to replace 2 players because it's unlikely you're going to get them back. So then, are you going to find somebody else who's done what they've done? Probably not. So you're almost having to bring 2 players in for that. But yeah, I mean, as long as it's not at the detriment of stopping your own, and I think the Burstow one's a good point to make. The last, I think it was 6 or 7 games he didn't feature, and it did get to the point where you think, well, there's no real point of keeping on using him because if he's going to go back in the summer, Sunderland season was over. You might as well have looked towards some of your own, whether that would have been a Job or one of the 3 who was in the building. I just think that, it's absolutely a market that Sunderland should be looking at, and there's no reason that they can't continue to do that. But what will be interesting is, we've spoken about the academy quite a lot. Some of them coming through, you don't want it to be, if it's not working out, you don't want it necessarily to block their path. So, for example, the way Tommy Watson's gone, you wouldn't necessarily want a loan next season if it's middling out to stop his progression in the team, if that makes sense, especially the way Sunderland are going as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Obviously, we'll do a quick plug for the under-21s who are in action tonight against West Ham United. We'll be there to bring in action. I mean, if they get a win there, that's, just a great result. Bearing in mind the Hammers finished 2nd in Premier League 2. We'll quickly touch on, obviously, development this year. We've done it so many times in recent weeks just because, they've been the real shining light for Sunderland this season, the under-21s, and they've improved year on year. In previous years, I've mentioned about the first team players dropping down, but this year it's a real good group of, genuine academy talents that are coming through. You've got under 18s playing at under 21s level, etc. Under 16s, for example, playing at under 18s level. There's a real sort of good pathway now, and they're not afraid to move players up and down the levels either.
No, it's really good, and that can go right the way down to
Yeah.
under 16s and under 40. Each way if they're going to progress up and jump age gaps. I mean, you think where Chris Rigg is, he's the example that will always go doing this.
Yeah.
In theory, there's no way he should be in the first team picture. He's still got sort of 2 or 3 age groups that he should be going through and developing.
Yeah.
So that just shows if the talent's there, Sunderland are going to use it, and they are going to allow players to sort of jump through the hoops almost and bridge the gap. I think it's key that the way that they do things at the academy, they have all the teams in house there. Sometimes that's not the case, and I'm talking about 21s, first team, the women's team. Everyone's kind of all in house there on board. Everyone knows the staff. It's one thing that Graham Murphy's pointed out quite a few times that he's sort of keen to stress when the academy players are in there with the first team. Everyone kind of knows everyone's name. All the first team staff knows everyone's names, and they go about themselves and produce themselves the right way. And being people, isn't it, as well as footballers? From Graham Murphy's point of view, this is. But just having everyone integrated like that is only going to help, and that's something that that the academy's. It's no secret that the academy was neglected in the previous ownership. Players being sold off for next to no value. So it's nice to see things turn around. Like you say, that with the success that they've had this season, it's only going to allow more potential to bridge the gap into the first team from other players as well.
Yeah, I mean, Graham, he gives a great insight. He's great whenever we speak to him just on, the inner workings of the academy. We'll move things on slightly. Before we do, if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget you can get in touch, drop us a message. Make sure you subscribe if you're over there, and you can turn your notification bell on so you don't miss a single video. On the summer, obviously, we've seen the likes of Chris Willick, for example, somebody linked with. We've put a sort of mini scout report together just on if a player of his caliber was to be linked. It would tie in with suggestions that, there are going to be tweaks to the model this summer. On the other side of things, you've got the likes of Divin and Boomer being linked. I'm unsure whether he'll be in action for West Ham tonight, but if he is, it'll be good sort of to get a glimpse at what he might be able to bring. Somebody else who I'll speak about quickly, I put a tweet out that got quite a lot of attraction just on Dejan Brown. Now, obviously, Sunderland have scouted him this season. They're not alone with their interest in him. Whether they make a move is another matter. But he's someone who's really impressed. And I said, if you compare it to this season's strikers, there's no reason why he couldn't have slotted into Sunderland's side. That's purely on the basis of what they've got this season. That's not me saying that they should go all out, all guns blazing to go and get him. Obviously, he's a Derby player on the contract until 2026, so they would have to part money to get him. And he's held in such high regard there. But if you compare him to this season, he's great. Such a raw talent for someone who's 18 years old. Again, I've spoken so many times on here. They need experience next season. They need an experienced number 9 who's played at championship level. But if you were to bring in Brown alongside somebody like that, then that's exciting. We've spoken again on this pod so many times about the type of players that they've brought in. And we've seen this year from, the foreign imports that they've brought into the club this summer that it's been tough for them to settle. You wouldn't have that sort of adaptability issue, or you would like to think that you wouldn't. For the likes of somebody like Boomer or Brown, they're two players who, they're English, they're from here. You would, in theory, you wouldn't think they'd struggle if they were to come.
No, I agree. The Brown one's quite interesting, for example, for the reasons you just mentioned there. If you compare them with how Hamia's done, for example, similar age, similar sort of type of forward, you would think. And you could imagine Brown probably offering more than what we've seen from Hamia this season, just purely by sort of being immersed in the culture of a little bit more. I watched him once this season in the 7-1 over Hartlepool back in March, and he was one that did stand out for me. Look, it's a huge jump, and we had this conversation about Macaulay Langstaff, in January when he was linked with a move to the Championship. He did it at National League level. He's done it at League 2 level. And he's sort of flirting around with then making the jump up. You wonder whether Brown would need a loan like that, or maybe a League 2 loan next season. Certainly 6 months, the first half of the season, to see how he'd fare there. But at the same time, bringing someone like him in and putting him in the academy, the way that they're going, that could be another environment that they would thrive in. So you can see, particularly with the model that Sunderland have, why someone like him would tick a lot of boxes. But let's make no mistake about it. Obviously, if you bring Brown in, you're still needing your sort of 2 strikers. He would be brought in very much as a project almost. But I think there's a lot to like about somebody like him, absolutely.
Yeah, that then raises questions again, though, doesn't it? Because what does that say about the strikers who you have on your books?
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting point. I forget which podcast I heard the lads talking about it on, but at some point, and I'm not going to do this just yet because, again, as I say, look, it takes time for young players to adapt. But at some point, if there's no improvement, you reach it's only natural. It's football. You reach a stage where, when do you cut your losses on these players? We spoke about, Lahaji. Last year was January he signed, and then he was gone by the summer. We could see a similar sort of thing. That's not me within any insider information suggesting we will. I'm just saying that it's something that the club have shown that they will do so if the right sort of bid comes in.
Absolutely, and I think the sort of 6 months, the pre-season and the first half of next season, are going to be key for all these players. It's not unfair to say that not one of them's worked out so far. Yeah, you look at somebody like Rusin who's had flashes at times, but they all need to step it up. It's as simple as that. And if there's no signs of that, then you get to the point 18 months down the line, being here for that, should they be adapting by then? Some of them, again, Rusin, 20 appearances, I think, is the time, like you said, to start thinking about cutting your losses, or where else do you go if you bring another strikers in, which needs to happen anyway. And if another striker comes in and hits the ground running, then what does that say regardless anyway, because they're going to be further down the pecking order. So big pre-season for all of them, like we said, for a number of players. But then going into the season, these players have to start producing. I mean, someone like Mayenda, a lot of potential there, but didn't really get given a chance in the first half of last season, went to Hibs, hasn't really featured. Where you're at with someone like him? Where's his confidence at? How do you do something? You're talking about a Brown, for example, similar age again. Where would them two sort of, for example, marry up? So a lot of spin and play at Sunderland this summer, and the striker one. You asked me last week about where the forward line, right the way across, but again, it's through that middle, isn't it? It's that number 9 that the Sunderland absolutely need to bring, for me, 2 in, and that's irrespective of whether you bring in then another prospect through.
Yeah, again, just to sort of round things off on Divin Mubama, he's got 18 senior appearances for West Ham. Sunderland have quite a good track record with, sort of snatching academy talents from West Ham. Okay, Pierre Ekwa hasn't had a great season, but, you don't look at him and think, he looks out of his depth at Championship level. Adji Elise, another one who came through West Ham's academy, who's been great when fit. That has, again, as was said on one of the pods in previous weeks, that has the signs of an exciting signing. He's played European football with the Hammers. It's interesting though, as you've said, because on the face of things, if you were to bring in somebody like him who wants to further his career, he's not got the game time he wants at West Ham, that would be fine. But the caveat is with Sunderland, as we've seen this season, is that the strikers have struggled, and if he comes in and he does struggle, you're then left, questioning again, why are they pursuing with this model when it's been glaringly obvious? But again, he could come in and could bag a hatful. It could work. It's all about finding the balance, and that's what they've struggled with the season just gone.
I mean, what you would say is if he came in and he was if you're going into the season with him as your sign up front, people wouldn't be satisfied with that.
Yeah,
that would leave themselves on to a lot of questions, particularly then if he didn't start the season well, and again hanging your hopes and expectations on a young striker. Yeah, he made 18 senior appearances, but to go in and then start and then be it for a full season, that's asking a lot for any player like that. That's why you need someone, not a seasoned pro, but again, Dodd spoke about, didn't he? We're not talking about 30-year-olds, talking just about players who've had a couple of hundred appearances in and around this level. That can be vital. Even if I'm almost going to open myself up criticism here, even if they're not complete out and out goal scorers, yes, centre forward, but not someone who's got a great goal record. Just someone to bring somebody like that along, or a youngster along, almost would almost be better than just going in with a youngster. Or it feels like that to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the one thing about Sunderland's recruitment. Again, they've brought in technically talented players. Now, all of the strikers who they did bring in the summer, they are different, but they're the same at the same time. They've lacked experience. And the comment that we've just had through from Stuart's interest, and obviously the transition period for me is, that's if Sunderland were to appoint a head coach who's been out of work, having had months to do so, that again, as you say there, that would seem, that would, open them up to, flack from supporters, and again, you'd be left raising your questions, going, well, this, in hindsight, it could be a wonderful thing, but you could have had a manager in there who has seen the group of players that he's got in a competitive environment for the final few games of the season. Again, obviously that's not going to happen. But if they bring somebody in who has been out of work, you're just leaving yourself open to questions, really, aren't you?
It's such a difficult one, and I've gone on both sides of the fence with this in terms of when head coach was appointed. If the person that you wanted available wasn't available in March or February, rather, absolutely, obviously, it was the right thing to do in terms of giving Dodds the interim period. If he was, or if it ends up that he was, then surely you could have brought him in then. But then equally, the season, as much, it's almost as though they admit that the season was about done then. Or particularly if you think getting to the international break, Dodds hadn't won in 6. International break came, that could have been a time to do it. But then would you have wanted the head coach, the new person, almost associated with that? I think we spoke about before. Even from the potential head coach, would they want to come in and associate themselves with the end of last season? They'd almost rather wait until the summer and bring it in. But then within that, you would have expected the appointment by now. So there's a lot of things that the transition, like what Stuart's saying there, is you can totally understand why it feels as though it's not really aligned at the moment, and that they still haven't really identified the candidate, because it leads to that. But I am sort of on both sides of the fence with that. I can and can't see why they did what they did. It was almost a little bit of a no-win situation. You do what they did, and the season ended up terrible. Or you flip it, and then you bring a new head coach in. The season could still have petered out that way. Then you've lost any sort of potential with a new manager coming in. Then you're sort of wondering how the summer's going to play out. So it was a difficult one, but at the same time, it was a position that they put themselves in through the appointment anyway, and the decision to sack Mowbray in December. So, yeah, you can understand frustrations of supporters, no doubt about it. And the longer that it goes on, that is only going to heighten. Again, like we spoke about at the start of this show, because of the end of the season. It was a difficult place to put themselves in.
Yeah, and we'll draw things under, a line under things there nicely. We'll see what this week brings. As we've said, obviously, we are Sunderland in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians. You can subscribe to our website. It's just £1 for 6 months worth of content. It's £2.99 per month after that. If you subscribe at the moment, you could win a pair of season tickets in the Black Cats bar ahead of the 2024-25 Championship campaign. We've also got a competition on Facebook and Twitter. If you just share the post that we've put on, all the instructions are on there. We'll catch you later in the week.